Hey everybody, it's Shayna Galen, and this week I'm going to be talking about the Regency period. A lot of times people will ask me what I write, and when I say I write historical romance, they'll ask me what time period, and I will say the Regency period. And then they kind of get a blank look on their face, and I realize they have no idea what that means. So I thought I would talk a little bit about the Regency period. Many of you probably already know what that is, and if so, you can pat yourself on the back because you know more than probably 95% of the rest of the people in the world. So the Regency period was a period in England which is technically between 1811 and 1820, but for the purposes of books set in the Regency period is more like 1795 to 1830 something. And it's basically the period when King George III was mentally incapacitated, and his son, who later became George IV, but who during that time was um, not so lovingly referred to as Prinny, was the regent. So we had a prince regent who was ruling in place of the king who was undergoing medical treatment. Um, and because the Prince Regent was a profligate spender and had relatively lax morals and liked a good party and to host a party and to go to parties, the period was a time when there was quite a bit of entertaining going on. There were still very, strict rules by today's standards, but there were also quite a few scandals in the period. So that is the Regency period and why it was called the Regency period in England, and it's a very popular period in historical fiction, just because there were so many things going on during that period. And one of those important things going on during that period was, of course, the Napoleonic Wars. Napoleon had risen to power in France after the French Revolution, and he had decided that he was not content with just ruling France, and he set his eyes on other parts of Europe and also on England. And the English ended up going to war with him, defeated him, then had to go back to war with him. And so this is actually the time period when the wars with Napoleon are over after the Battle of Waterloo, which was in 1815. This is the period that my book, Third Son's a Charm, is set. It's 1816, 1817, when the soldiers have come home from battle and they're settling kind of back into life. So in my book, of course, these men have been on the continent and they have been fighting against Napoleon, and now they've come back to London. Who really the people that they know, the gentry, would have just kind of carried on as though there wasn't a war on. In fact, if you read pieces written during that period, I mean, for example, if you read Jane Austen, she rarely mentions anything about a war or about Napoleon or France or anything like that. So it was seemed relatively easy without TV and radio and all of that and Facebook to kind of pretend there really wasn't a war going on. Some other things that happened or people that were important during that period of the Regency. Um, you had, of course, I said the Battle of Waterloo. So that was when the Duke of Wellington kind of distinguished himself, and he wasn't the Duke of Wellington then, but he later became the Duke of Wellington. You had fashion icon Beau Brummel running around and becoming quite well known. You had poets like Lord Byron writing and also involving themselves in scandal. So those were a few of the famous people from that time period. Um, Other things that happened during that time period are I mentioned the wars with Napoleon, and then of course there had been in the very early part of that period there was the unrest in in France, and even before that, there was unrest in America. And so during the Regency period, there was also some attempts by the poor to establish more rights or gain more rights. And so there were some riots and some various uprisings in England as well. So that's a little bit about the Regency period, and hopefully you are already read some books during that period. And if not, I hope you'll give them a try.